King Charles has spent the better part of a decade protecting his younger son's disastrous choice. New evidence keeps stacking up that the marriage itself was never about love, duty, or modernizing the monarchy. It was about survival. Because if Meghan Markle had never landed Prince Harry, she and her mother might very well have been answering questions in a courtroom instead of collecting titles and Netflix checks. Fraud. That is the word floating around the edges of this story that polite society still pretends not to hear. Today we are going to examine the pattern, the engagement interview that reeked of performance, the first public appearances that looked like a Diana cosplay with added tongue-sticking-out theatrics, the daily protocol sabotage, the treatment of her own father, and the spineless refusal of a king to do the one thing the public has been demanding for years: strip the titles and end the charade. This is not gossip. This is the bill coming due, November 2017. The engagement interview. Meghan Markle sits beside Harry looking every inch the wide-eyed American ingenue discovering the wonders of royal life. Soft voice, modest smiles. The carefully rehearsed line about never having watched the royal family growing up, about it all being so new and overwhelming. It was pure theatre. A woman in her mid-30s who had spent years in the Hollywood machine, who understood cameras, lighting and narrative control better than most publicists, suddenly performing shy. The same woman who within months would be arguing with palace aides about protocol she claimed nobody had explained to her, while photographers just happened to be perfectly positioned to catch every rolled eye and every deliberate breach. She knew exactly what she was doing. Break the rules. Force the reaction. Generate the headline. Tell the institution in the only language it understands I can do whatever I want. That first public engagement after the wedding, the shy-die act, head tilted, eyes lowered, the soft voice again, followed almost immediately by the tongue stuck out at photographers. A woman pushing 40 behaving like a teenager testing boundaries. It was not charming, it was calculated. Every protocol violation was a message. The rules do not apply to me. And Harry stood there enabling it, smiling, because by then the dynamic was already set. She was never going to adapt to the institution. The institution was going to be forced to adapt to her or be publicly shamed for refusing. And the royal family under Charles's eventual leadership chose the path of least resistance every single time. Then there is Thomas Markle. The treatment of her own father remains one of the most revealing chapters in this entire saga. A man who was, by all accounts, imperfect as most fathers are, but who is nonetheless her father. The coordinated distance, the public distancing, the refusal to facilitate even basic contact while the couple performed compassion on every available platform, told you everything about character. Harry's willingness to go along with that isolation should have been a red flag the size of Buckingham Palace. A man who will cut off his own family members at the behest of a partner is not a man operating from strength. He is a man already captured. And yet Charles continued to extend protection, titles, and the benefit of every doubt. Why? Because confronting the truth would mean admitting that the marriage itself was a catastrophic misjudgment, and that the cover-up of that misjudgment has now lasted nearly a decade. Let us address the uncomfortable claim circulating with increasing frequency, that without the royal marriage, Meghan Markle and her mother might have faced serious legal exposure over financial dealings and representations made in the years leading up to the wedding. I am not a court. I am not presenting a legal brief. I am observing a pattern that keeps resurfacing in independent reporting and in the quiet admissions of people who were adjacent to the pre-royal career. The Hollywood years were not the fairy tale origin story later sold to the public. There were debts, disputes, questions about representation and income streams. The royal wedding did not merely elevate a lifestyle. It provided an instantaneous, near-impenetrable shield of status, legal resources, and public sympathy. Marriage to Harry solved multiple problems at once: financial pressure, social reinvention, and the acquisition of a global platform that no amount of Suits' residual checks could have purchased. That is not romance, that is strategy. And once the strategy was executed, the behavior followed a consistent logic. maximize leverage, minimize accountability, and treat any institutional pushback as evidence of racism, sexism, or cruelty. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the endless cycle of grievance, all of it served the same purpose. Keep the victim narrative alive so that any serious scrutiny of the original motives or the ongoing conduct could be dismissed as further persecution. 10 years of hell, the public is now calling it. Not for them. For everyone else forced to watch the institution contort itself around two people who never intended to serve it. Return to the daily operational reality inside the household. Aides who tried to brief her on basic expectations were met with arguments and claims of ignorance that strained credibility. Photographers were guaranteed images of rule-breaking because the rule-breaking was the point. Every departure from established practice generated coverage. Every coverage cycle reinforced the brand of the modern, independent duchess who refused to be constrained. It was never accidental. A woman who had spent her professional life understanding how media attention is harvested does not accidentally stick her tongue out at the press corps on a public engagement. She does not accidentally create scenes that force the palace into reactive mode. She does it because the attention is the product, and the product requires constant replenishment. Harry's role in this has been to provide the royal bloodline and the residual public goodwill that still clings to the younger son narrative. Without the titles, without the residual association with the crown, the entire enterprise collapses into just another celebrity couple with a complicated family history and a tendency toward grievance. Which brings us to the only real solution that has ever been on the table. King Charles has the power to remove the titles. It has been done before. It can be done again. The public has made its preference clear for years. These two have demonstrated, repeatedly and publicly, that they hold the institution in contempt while continuing to trade on its residual prestige. Yet Charles has not acted. He has managed, delayed, hoped the problem would somehow diminish with time and distance. It has not. The problem has only grown more expensive, more embarrassing, and more corrosive to public respect for the monarchy itself. Spineless is the word that keeps returning in comment sections and private conversations among people who once gave him the benefit of the doubt. A king who will not defend the dignity of the crown against two people who have spent a decade undermining it is a king who has already conceded the argument. Prince William is watching. The public is watching. And the longer this farce continues, the clearer it becomes that the real threat to the future of the royal family was never external criticism. It was the decision to prioritize one son's poor judgment over the integrity of the institution itself. Remove the titles. Without them, the leverage disappears. The platform shrinks. The ability to monetize residual royal status evaporates. What remains is simply two private individuals who made a series of choices and now have to live with the ordinary consequences of those choices. That is not cruelty. That is accountability. And accountability is the one thing this entire saga has systematically avoided for 10 long years. The engagement interview was fake. The early public performances were calculated. The protocol breaches were deliberate. The treatment of Thomas Markle was unforgivable. The continued protection from the top has been a dereliction. New evidence keeps emerging that the marriage solved problems far more practical than romantic. The public is no longer required to pretend otherwise. King Charles has had a decade to demonstrate that the crown still possesses a spine. So far, the evidence suggests otherwise. When William inherits, the question will no longer be whether the titles can be removed. It will be why it took so long. Within weeks, the performance shifted. The first public engagements produced the shy Diana imitation, complete with the tilted head and the gentle voice, followed almost immediately by the tongue stuck out at the cameras. A woman approaching 40, treating a royal appearance like a playground dare. That was not nerves, that was branding. She was telling every photographer, every aide, and ultimately the Queen herself that the old rules no longer applied. She would break them deliberately on camera and then act surprised when the images appeared. The pattern never changed. Palace staff who tried to brief her on protocol were met with arguments and claims that no one had ever explained anything. The ignorance was always selective. The breaches were always timed for maximum visibility. Attention was the currency, and she spent it freely, knowing the institution would pay the price in headlines and internal chaos. Then there is her father, Thomas Markle. The way he was handled remains one of the clearest windows into character available. A man kept at arm's length, publicly diminished, and ultimately discarded while his daughter and her husband performed empathy on every available stage. That decision was not forced by circumstance, it was chosen. And Harry's willingness to participate in the isolation of his wife's own father revealed exactly how far he had already surrendered his judgment. People still ask why Charles has protected this arrangement for so long. The answer is becoming harder to avoid. Confronting the marriage means confronting what it may have rescued her from. The pre-royal years were not the clean professional ascent later described. There were financial pressures, disputed representations, and questions that never received clean answers. Marriage to a senior royal did not merely change her postcode. It placed her and her mother behind a wall of status and resources that ordinary legal scrutiny would have struggled to penetrate. That is not speculation for the sake of drama. It is the logical reading of a timeline that suddenly made every previous problem disappear the moment the engagement was announced. The wedding solved more than a romantic equation. It solved exposure, and once the shield was in place, the strategy continued. Any criticism became proof of hostility. Any request for basic accountability became an attack. The opera interview, the streaming deals, the endless cycle of grievance, all of it served the same function: keep the narrative of persecution alive so that the original calculation would never be examined too closely. Charles has watched this unfold for a decade. He has the authority to remove the titles. Precedent exists. The public has made its position clear. Yet he has chosen delay management and quiet hope that the problem will somehow age out of relevance. It has not. It has grown more expensive, more corrosive, and more damaging to the monarchy's remaining credibility. A king who will not defend the dignity of the crown against two people who have treated it as a personal branding opportunity is a king who has already surrendered the argument. Spineless is the word that keeps returning, and it is earned. The longer the titles remain, the longer the residual prestige can be monetized, the longer the fiction continues. Without those titles, the entire operation shrinks to its true size. Two private individuals with a complicated history and a proven talent for grievance. No automatic platform, no automatic deference, no automatic protection, just the ordinary consequences of ordinary choices. William is watching, the public is watching, and every month that passes without decisive action makes the eventual reckoning more unavoidable. The question will not be whether the titles can be removed. It will be why a father and a king allowed the damage to continue for so long. The engagement was theatre. The early public behavior was deliberate provocation. The protocol breaches were attention harvests. The treatment of Thomas Markle was a character statement. The continued royal protection has been an institutional failure. 10 years of hell is the phrase now used by people who once gave the benefit of the doubt. Not hell for the couple. Hell for everyone required to pretend the story was ever anything other than a successful escape dressed up as a romance. And look, I'm not a body language expert. I'm not going to pretend to be one. But I am someone with two functioning eyes and the ability to compare what a person says with what a person does. And in that interview, Meghan Markle said she didn't know much about Harry before they met. She said she asked her friend, "Is he nice?" As if she, an actress living in Toronto, deeply embedded in celebrity culture, with a well-documented history of social climbing, had somehow never Googled one of the most famous men on the planet. She said that on camera, and expected us to believe it. The thing about Meghan Markle is that she has always underestimated the intelligence of the British public. She looked into that camera in 2017 and saw an audience she could manipulate. What she didn't understand, and what she still doesn't understand 7 years later, is that British people have a finely tuned radar for insincerity. It's practically a national superpower. We can detect a fraud at 40 paces. We've had centuries of practice. She was, to use a phrase that I think captures it perfectly, fake as the day is long. And the day in November is very long indeed, but here's the thing. The fakeness wasn't the scandal. People are fake all the time. Politicians are fake. Celebrities are fake. Half the people on morning television are fake. No, the scandal was why she was being fake. What was she hiding behind all that practiced warmth? What was the real story? Her first public engagements as Harry's fiancée were instructive. Let's call them that. She adopted what many royal watchers immediately recognized as the shy-die persona. The downcast eyes, the tentative smile, the slight nervousness. The sense of a woman who couldn't quite believe she was here, in this world, surrounded by all this history and grandeur. It was a carbon copy, a tribute act, and it was deeply, deeply calculated, because Diana's shyness was real. Diana was 19 years old. She was a nursery school assistant from an aristocratic family who had been thrust into the most scrutinized role on earth with almost no preparation. Her vulnerability was genuine, and it broke the nation's heart because we could see it was genuine. Meghan Markle was 36 years old. She was a professional actress with years of experience performing on camera. She had navigated Hollywood, which, whatever you think of it, is not a place for the timid. She had been married before. She had dated celebrities. She was not shy. She was not overwhelmed. She was acting. And then, and this is the moment that I think crystallized it for millions of people, she stuck her tongue out on a public engagement. In front of cameras, in front of the world. Now, I want to be fair here. People stick their tongues out. It's playful. It's human. If a 20-something had done it, we might have found it endearing. But this was a woman approaching 40 who had just spent weeks performing wide-eyed innocence and regal deference. And suddenly there it was, the mask slipping. Not into vulnerability, into contempt, because that's what it was. It was a signal, a small, almost imperceptible signal that said, I don't take any of this seriously. Your traditions, your protocols, your centuries of history, I can do whatever I want. And she could, because Harry was besotted, and Charles was paralyzed. And the institution, that ancient, creaking, magnificent institution, had no immune system capable of dealing with a threat that came from inside the family. Let's talk about the protocol breaches. Because this is where the narrative shifts from personal critique to institutional analysis. Meghan Markle did not accidentally break royal protocol. She broke it deliberately, systematically, and strategically. Every single time, the dark nail polish, the off-shoulder dresses, the clutching of Harry's hand during formal engagements, the crossing of legs at the knee rather than the ankle, the unauthorized solo meetings, the closing of her own car doors, which sounds trivial until you understand that it's not about the car door, it's about the security formation that the car door protocol is designed to maintain. Each breach was small. Each breach was deniable. Oh, nobody told me. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I'm just being modern. But taken together, they formed a pattern. And the pattern was unmistakable. She was testing boundaries, not because she didn't know where they were, but because she wanted to see what would happen when she crossed them. And here's what's crucial. She knew the photographers would capture every single breach. She knew it would make headlines. She wanted it to make headlines, because every headline that said Meghan breaks protocol was a headline that positioned her as a rebel, a modernizer, a disruptor, and positioned the institution as stuffy, outdated, and unreasonable. It was a strategy, and it was brilliant. In a sociopathic sort of way, royal aides, people who had served the crown for decades, people who understood that protocol exists not as arbitrary restriction, but as the institutional grammar that holds the monarchy together, these people tried to guide her. They offered advice. They explained the reasoning behind the rules, and she argued with them. She dismissed them. She reportedly told them she knew better. And when the inevitable friction became public, she positioned herself as the victim. Nobody helped me. I was thrown to the wolves. I didn't receive guidance. The aides who tried to help her, several of them resigned. Some reportedly described their working environment as toxic. The word bullying was used. An investigation was launched and then quietly buried by the palace. Buried, we are now learning, at the direction of people very close to the top. Which brings us to Charles, King Charles III. A man who waited longer for his job than anyone in history. A man of genuine intellect, genuine environmental conviction, genuine artistic sensibility. A man who in many ways has been a better Prince of Wales than anyone had a right to expect. And a man who, when it came to Meghan Markle, failed, comprehensively, catastrophically, and it increasingly appears deliberately because Charles knew. Let's be absolutely clear about this. The palace conducts background research on anyone who enters the royal orbit at that level. Security services are involved. Financial backgrounds are examined. Family histories are scrutinized. This is not gossip. This is standard operating procedure for the protection of the crown. So when Meghan Markle entered Harry's life, the machinery of the institution would have turned. And what that machinery would have found, the financial irregularities, the inconsistencies in her personal narrative, the questions surrounding certain business dealings connected to her family, all of that would have been flagged, documented, reported upward, and Charles made a decision. The decision was, say nothing, do nothing, let Harry have his happiness, let the fairy tale proceed, cover the cracks with smiles and walk her down the aisle yourself if her own father won't come. And in the moment you could understand it. What father wants to destroy his son's joy? What father wants to be the one who says, I'm sorry, but the woman you love is not who she says she is? But Charles wasn't just a father. He was the Prince of Wales. He was the future king. He had a duty not just to Harry, but to the institution, to the nation, to the Commonwealth. And he chose sentiment over duty. He chose short-term family harmony over long-term institutional protection. And look where we are now, a fractured family, a weaponized memoir, a Netflix deal built on betrayal. An institution that has been damaged, not destroyed, never destroyed, but damaged by a threat that could have been neutralized before it ever reached the altar. Charles covered up the truth for Harry, and the truth eventually did what truth always does. It came out anyway, just messier, just more painfully, just more publicly. Now we arrive at the most sensitive part of this story. And I want to be precise here, because precision matters. Multiple investigators and commentators who have examined the financial history of the Markle family prior to the royal engagement have raised significant questions. Questions about business dealings. Questions about financial representations. Questions about the kind of irregularities that, in other circumstances, with other people, without the protective shield of a royal connection, might have attracted the attention of law enforcement. I am not making accusations. I am reporting what has been reported. I am noting what has been noted by credible investigators with access to public records, and I am asking a simple question. If Meghan Markle had remained Meghan Markle, if she had continued to be a mid-tier actress on a cable legal drama, without the protection, the prestige, and the diplomatic immunity that comes with being a member of the British royal family, would those questions have been pursued? Would those financial irregularities have been examined? Would Meghan Markle and her mother, Doria Ragland, have faced scrutiny that they have, by virtue of royal association, been entirely shielded from? It is not unreasonable to suggest that the answer is yes. And if that's the case, if the royal marriage provided not just status and wealth and global fame, but actual legal protection, then the entire narrative of a love story takes on a very different complexion. It becomes potentially a survival strategy, a very effective one. Marry the prince, become untouchable. Let the institution that you will later claim oppressed you serve first as your shield. The irony would be exquisite if it weren't so deeply troubling. And now we must talk about Thomas Markle, because the treatment of this man tells you everything you need to know about the character of Meghan Markle, and by extension, the character of Prince Harry. Thomas Markle is an imperfect man. He made mistakes. The staged paparazzi photographs were ill-advised, embarrassing, and gave Meghan the excuse she was almost certainly looking for. But let's be proportionate here. Let's be human. This is a man who raised his daughter, who funded her education, who supported her career, who by all accounts available to us loved her deeply and was proud of her beyond measure, and she cut him off, completely, totally. With the surgical precision of someone who has practiced emotional amputation before. He found out about the engagement from the news. He learned details about his own grandchildren from television. He suffered a heart attack in the days before the wedding, a heart attack, not a diplomatic inconvenience, and was unable to attend. And rather than reaching out, rather than visiting, rather than doing what any minimally decent human being would do for a parent in medical crisis, Meghan Markle sent a letter that was carefully crafted not as a genuine attempt at reconciliation, but as a document designed to be legally and publicly defensible when it was inevitably leaked. Which it was, because she knew it would be. Thomas Markle has spent years trying to reconnect with his daughter. He has begged publicly because private channels have been sealed shut. He is an old man in declining health who wants to meet his grandchildren before he dies, and the response from Montecito has been silence. Strategic, calculated, merciless silence. Now you can tell me a lot about a person by how they treat the powerful, but you can tell me everything about a person by how they treat the powerless. Thomas Markle has no PR team, he has no Netflix deal, he has no leverage. And so he has been discarded. Harry's complicity in this is unforgivable. This is a man who lost his own mother, a man who has spoken endlessly and publicly about the pain of parental loss. And yet he sits in his Montecito mansion and watches his wife's father beg for contact with his grandchildren and does nothing. It tells you what kind of man he has become. It tells you what kind of influence he is under. And it tells you that the Harry we thought we knew, the cheeky, warm military prince who walked behind his mother's coffin and broke the world's heart, that Harry is gone. What remains is a man so thoroughly absorbed into his wife's reality that he has lost the ability to see his own cruelty. So, what is to be done? Answer is simple. It has always been simple. And the fact that it hasn't been done tells you everything about the current state of the monarchy under Charles III. Remove their titles. Strip the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of the titles that give them their platform, their credibility, their marketability. Without Prince Harry and the Duchess of Sussex, they are simply Harry and Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. Private citizens with opinions. Private citizens with a podcast that nobody listens to and a Netflix deal that is reportedly underperforming. Without titles, they are nothing. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it is the market reality. The entire Montecito operation, the speaking engagements, the patronages, the invitations, the media deals, all of it is built on one thing, the Royal Association. Remove the association and the commercial value evaporates overnight. Can it be done? Absolutely it can be done. Historically, titles have been removed. Letters patent can be amended. The sovereign has the authority. The legal mechanism exists. The precedent exists. The public will exists. Overwhelming consistently shows that the British public supports the removal of the Sussexes' titles. So why hasn't it happened? Because Charles hasn't got the guts. And I'm sorry to say that so bluntly, but there is no more diplomatic way to express it. The King of the United Kingdom and the other Commonwealth realms, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, head of the armed forces, this man with all that authority, all that power, all that constitutional weight is afraid to discipline his youngest son. It is spineless. It is pathetic, and it is damaging the monarchy. I used to admire Charles. I admired his patience. I admired his environmental campaigning when it was deeply unfashionable. I admired the way he handled decades of public ridicule about his personal life with quiet dignity. I thought he would be a better king than people expected, and in many ways he has been. The coronation was magnificent. His dedication to duty since ascending the throne, even through cancer treatment, has been genuinely admirable. His work ethic is extraordinary, but on this one issue, the Sussex issue, he has been weak. He has prioritized his personal feelings as a father over his constitutional duty as sovereign, and the institution is paying the price. Every day that Harry and Meghan retain their titles is a day that they can weaponize those titles against the family that gave them. Every day is another opportunity for another interview, another documentary, another tell-all, another half-truth dressed up as brave honesty. The solution is sitting right there, on his desk, waiting for a signature. And he won't sign it, which is why, for many of us, the real hope lies not with Charles but with William. Prince William has watched all of this unfold from closer range than anyone. He has seen his brother transformed. He has seen his family attacked. He has seen his wife, who, by the way, has handled everything thrown at her with a grace and dignity that makes Meghan Markle's victim narrative look even more absurd by comparison. He has seen Catherine subjected to rumour, speculation and cruelty from Sussex allies, and William has said very little. Publicly at least. He has maintained the dignified silence that the institution demands, but those who know him say that he has drawn his conclusions. And that when his time comes, when he ascends to the throne, the Sussex question will be resolved, not with cruelty, not with vindictiveness, but with clarity, with firmness, with the understanding that the monarchy survives not by accommodating those who seek to destroy it, but by having the courage to protect itself. William understands something that Charles, for all his intelligence, seems unable to grasp, that mercy without justice is not mercy at all, it is weakness. And weakness in an institution that depends on public respect for its survival is fatal. So here we are, 10 years into a story that was sold to us as a fairy tale and has turned out to be something closer to a cautionary one. A woman who needed a prince not for love but for protection. A prince who was too damaged, too lonely, too desperate for love to see what was happening. A father who knew the truth and buried it. An institution that failed to defend itself. A public that saw through the performance from the very first interview but was told, again and again, that what they were seeing wasn't real. It was real. It was always real. The instincts of the British public, those finely tuned, centuries-old instincts for detecting insincerity, were right from day one. Meghan Markle married Prince Harry because she needed to. The fairy tale was a lifeboat, and the man she married was not a partner but a means to an end. From the very beginning of her public life, Meghan Markle has been in the business of constructing a narrative about herself. A specific narrative, a narrative of the self-made woman. The biracial girl who didn't quite fit in anywhere, who worked twice as hard, who overcame obstacles that would have defeated lesser people, who arrived at success through sheer force of will and talent and determination. It is a compelling story. It is, in its broad outlines, the kind of story that resonates deeply with a particular kind of audience. And Meghan Markle has always known exactly which audiences she is performing for, and exactly which version of herself those audiences want to see. The problem is that stories, unlike people, leave traces. Documents exist. Timelines can be checked. People who were there have memories. And when you begin to cross-reference the authorized Meghan Markle narrative against the available documentary record, something interesting happens. Things don't match up, not in dramatic ways. Not in ways that any single journalist could point to and say, "There, that is the lie, that is the definitive proof." But in the accumulation of small mismatches, small inconsistencies, small moments where the story told publicly and the reality documented privately seem to be describing two entirely different lives, something becomes clear. The narrative has been managed. Carefully, professionally, consistently managed. Not just since the royal connection, but long before it. This is not a woman who stumbled into spin. This is a woman for whom spin is a native language. And that skill, that extraordinary, almost preternatural ability to control a narrative, is precisely what made her so dangerous to an institution that has spent centuries being defined by other people's stories about it, and has never quite developed the tools to fight back. Let's talk about the timeline. Because the timeline is where the first cracks appear. By the time Meghan Markle met Prince Harry in the summer of 2016, she was 34 years old. She had been acting professionally for over a decade, with modest success culminating in her role on Suits, the American legal drama that would give her the platform she needed. She had been married once before to film producer Trevor Engelson, a marriage that lasted approximately 2 years before she ended it, reportedly by post, sending back her wedding ring by mail, a detail that her defenders call apocryphal, but that multiple sources close to Engelson have never contradicted. She had built a lifestyle brand, The Tig, a blog and social media presence that positioned her as a purveyor of conscious, aspirational living. Healthy recipes, travel recommendations, thoughtful reflections on feminism and identity. She had cultivated relationships with celebrities, with philanthropists, with people who had access to the kind of rooms she wanted to be in. She was, in other words, a woman in vigorous and deliberate pursuit of an upgrade. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with ambition. Ambition is admirable. Ambition is how things get done. The question is not whether Meghan Markle was ambitious. The question is whether the specific form her ambition took, and the specific methods she employed in pursuing it, were entirely above board, and this is where the financial questions begin to surface. The TIG was not simply a blog. It was a commercial enterprise, and the commercial arrangements surrounding it, the sponsorships, the partnerships, the financial relationships with brands and individuals, have raised questions among those who have examined the available records. Questions about disclosure, questions about the accurate representation of arrangements to partners and sponsors, questions about the kind of financial conduct that, in a regulated commercial environment, can attract serious regulatory attention. These questions were not invented by royal commentators after the Sussex drama began. They existed before the royal connection. They were documented before anyone knew who Meghan Markle was beyond a mid-level actress with a wellness blog, and when she married into the royal family, those questions did not disappear. They were acquired by the institution along with everything else. The palace inherited the questions when it acquired the Duchess. What it chose to do with those questions is the heart of this story. Here is something that the public does not fully appreciate about the British monarchy as an institution. It is not naive. It is not unworldly. It is not the collection of well-meaning amateurs in ceremonial dress that its public image sometimes suggests. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years. It has survived civil war, reformation, abdication, republicanism, 2 world wars, and the invention of Twitter. It has survived because, beneath the pageantry and the palaces and the carefully managed public appearances, it is run by extremely capable people who understand power, who understand threat, and who understand that the institution's survival depends on its ability to identify and neutralize dangers before those dangers become existential. Those people, the senior courtiers, the private secretaries, the communications directors, the security advisors, they are not decorative. They are functional. And their function, above all else, is protection of the crown. So when Meghan Markle entered Harry's life, they would have done what they always do. They would have looked carefully, thoroughly, professionally. They would have examined her background, her finances, her relationships, her history. They would have spoken to people who knew her. They would have reviewed available documentation. They would have assembled a picture. And the picture they assembled would not have been entirely flattering. The irregularities would have been there. The inconsistencies in her personal narrative would have been there. The questions about her financial conduct, about her family's financial conduct, about certain arrangements that don't entirely survive scrutiny, all of it would have been there, documented, flagged, reported upward through the institutional hierarchy. And then the decision was made to proceed anyway, to say nothing to Harry, to allow the engagement to happen. To welcome Meghan Markle into the family with open arms and a public smile, and an elaborate, globally televised wedding in Windsor Castle's St. George's Chapel. The decision was made at the very top, and the man at the top at that point was not the king. It was the Prince of Wales. It was Charles. Why would Charles make that decision? Why would a man of his intelligence and institutional awareness choose to ignore what the background research had revealed, and allow his son to marry a woman whose history raised serious questions? There are several possible answers, and I think the truth probably contains elements of all of them. The first is simple paternal love. Harry had found someone who made him happy. Harry had spent years in a kind of low-level public sadness, the boyish charm always slightly shadowed by what he had lost at 12 years old. The military career, a way of finding structure and purpose that civilian life hadn't provided, the relationships that didn't quite work out. And then suddenly, here was this woman who seemed to light him up, who seemed to give him something he had been missing. What father watching that transformation wants to be the one who takes it away? The second is institutional calculation. There is a version of Charles's thinking that goes something like this. We know what she is, we know what she wants, we can manage it. The monarchy has managed difficult personalities before. It has absorbed problematic family members before. It has contained, neutralized, and ultimately outlasted threats far more serious than one ambitious American actress. We bring her in, we control the environment, we manage the narrative, and she gets what she wants, the title, the platform, the global profile, while we maintain control of the institution. It was a calculation that turned out to be spectacularly wrong, because what Charles failed to understand, what the entire institutional establishment failed to understand, is that Meghan Markle was not playing by the rules they were used to. She was not a difficult aristocrat who could be soothed with patronages and managed with protocol. She was not a foreign princess who could be contained within the traditional frameworks. She was something the monarchy had genuinely never encountered before. A woman with a production deal sensibility, a social media native's understanding of narrative, and absolutely no intention of being managed by anyone. The third possible answer is the most uncomfortable one. And it is this: Charles covered for Harry because covering for Harry was easier than having the conversation that needed to be had. Because having that conversation would have required Charles to confront not just the questions about Meghan, but the questions about Harry. The questions about how his younger son had arrived at a point of such emotional vulnerability that he was susceptible to exactly this kind of influence. The questions about what Charles's own failures as a father had contributed to that vulnerability. The questions that, if asked honestly, pointed at least partly back at Charles himself. It is much easier to sign the papers and smile for the cameras than to look your son in the eye and say, "I am worried about you. I am worried about her. I am worried about what this is going to cost us all." Charles didn't have that conversation, and so the wedding happened, and so the disaster unfolded. And so here we are. One of the things that gets lost in the broader Sussex drama is the human cost to the individuals caught in the crossfire. And I don't mean Harry and Meghan. They have made their choices with full adult awareness of the consequences, and they are living in considerable comfort in a Californian mansion. My sympathy for them is limited. I mean the people around them. The staff members who worked for them and found themselves in environments they described as deeply distressing. The charities that found their associations with the Sussexes becoming more liability than asset. The journalists and commentators who wrote critically and found themselves subjected to coordinated harassment campaigns from Sussex supporters. The family members who maintained public silence while absorbing private pain. And I mean, above all, the people who were closest to Meghan before the royal connection, and who have since found themselves on the outside of a very firmly closed door. Because here is something worth noting. Almost everyone who was genuinely close to Meghan Markle before she became a duchess, not professional contacts, not useful acquaintances, but actual friends, people who had known her for years and had genuine affection for her, almost all of them are no longer in her life. They have been discarded, dropped. Some of them have spoken about it carefully and with evident pain. Others have maintained silence, but the pattern is unmistakable. When a person rises, they carry their genuine relationships upward with them, or they reveal, by dropping those relationships, what those relationships were actually for. Meghan Markle has revealed, through the systematic abandonment of almost everyone who knew her before 2016, what her relationships have always been for. They were investments. Returns were expected. When the returns dried up, the investment was liquidated. This is not a quality that appears suddenly in adulthood. This is a quality that develops over time, through practice, through a series of decisions made in private about what kind of person you are going to be, and what kinds of relationships you are willing to maintain. Meghan Markle has been making those decisions for a very long time. The royal family simply became her largest and most consequential investment. And when the returns from that investment were not what she had projected, when the institution proved unwilling to be wholly reshaped around her needs and preferences, when the deference she expected from centuries of courtly tradition turned out to have limits, when she discovered that being a duchess is not the same as being a celebrity, and that the crown does not ultimately revolve around any single person within it, she liquidated that investment too, the memoir, the Netflix deal. The Oprah interview, the podcast, the endless media campaign of grievance and reframing. These are not the actions of a wounded woman processing trauma in public. These are the actions of a business. The Sussex brand needs content. The content it has chosen is the destruction of the family that gave the brand its value in the first place. It is, when you think about it with clear eyes, quite breathtaking. Let us speak plainly about something that the more timid corners of royal commentary tend to dance around. The behavior that Meghan Markle has exhibited toward her father, toward the institution, toward the staff who worked for her, toward the family members who tried to make her feel welcome. This behavior has a profile. It is not random. It is not the product of stress or cultural misunderstanding or the unique pressures of royal life. It is a pattern. And patterns have names. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not going to make clinical diagnoses about a public figure I have never met. That would be irresponsible. But I will say this. The accumulation of behaviors, the discarding of relationships when their utility has expired, the extreme sensitivity to perceived slights, the grandiose sense of entitlement, the inability to take responsibility for outcomes she has clearly had a hand in creating, the positioning of herself as the perpetual victim regardless of what the facts suggest, the extraordinary capacity to reframe her own actions in ways that present them as virtuous regardless of their actual impact on others. This accumulation is not consistent with the portrait she has painted of herself. It is consistent with something else entirely. And the British public, those finely calibrated human lie detectors, with centuries of experience seeing through performance and pretension, worked out what that something else was a very long time ago. The polling has been consistent for years. Meghan Markle is one of the least popular public figures in the United Kingdom. Not because the British public is racist. That accusation is as lazy as it is dishonest, and it deliberately ignores the enormous affection that the public has shown for Black and Asian members of the royal household and the Commonwealth over many decades. The British public's dislike of Meghan Markle is not about her race. It is about her behavior. It is about the fact that they watched the engagement interview and they watched the first public engagements, and they watched the protocol breaches and the staged moments and the engineered photo opportunities, and they thought, we know what you are. And they were right. The question that remains, the question that will define the monarchy's relationship with this episode for decades to come, is what happens next. The Sussexes are still in Montecito. The titles are still in place. The commercial operation continues to grind forward, producing content of declining quality and impact, trading on an association with the Crown that the Crown itself seems unable or unwilling to sever. The palace continues its policy of dignified silence, which has the virtue of appearing gracious and the considerable disadvantage of allowing the Sussex narrative to fill the vacuum unchallenged. Every time the institution says nothing, the Sussexes say something. And in the attention economy, the person who speaks always has an advantage over the person who stays silent, regardless of the truth of what is being said. The titles are the key. They always have been, because the titles are not just honorifics. They are the commercial infrastructure of the entire Sussex operation. They are what makes the speaking engagements worth $100,000 apiece. They are what makes the Netflix deal viable. They are what gets the meetings, opens the doors, generates the media interest that sustains the brand. Strip the titles and the infrastructure collapses. Not immediately, not completely, but the trajectory changes. The commercial value depreciates. The brand becomes something else, former royals, estranged relatives, people who used to be connected to something important, and the market for that product is considerably smaller and less lucrative than the market for serving royalty. The mechanism exists, the precedent exists, the public appetite for it is overwhelming. What does not exist, apparently, is the will to use it, and that failure of will, that extraordinary, bewildering, almost surreal failure of will at the very top of the institution, is perhaps the most revealing thing about the state of the British monarchy right now. An institution that cannot protect itself from a mid-level actress with a lifestyle blog and a grievance is an institution that has a problem far deeper than the Sussexes. The Sussex crisis is a symptom. The disease is the institutional paralysis that allowed it to develop, that failed to cauterize it at the source, and that continues to watch it metastasize while wringing its hands and hoping it resolves itself. It will not resolve itself. These things never do when William becomes king, and that day is coming, sooner than any of us might wish given the circumstances that have placed the crown's continuity under renewed focus. He will inherit this problem along with everything else. The palaces and the patronages and the constitutional responsibilities, and the impossible balancing act of being simultaneously ancient and modern, sacred and accessible, human and symbolic. He will inherit all of it. And he will inherit the Sussex question, still unresolved, still festering, still generating content and controversy and draining institutional energy that could be directed toward literally anything more constructive. What he does with it will define his reign in its early years. And those who have watched William closely, not the public William of walkabouts and careful speeches, but the private William described by people who know him, say that he has a clarity about this question that his father has never quite managed. A clarity born not from coldness but from experience, from having watched his family be attacked, and having drawn the obvious conclusion about the nature of the attack and the identity of the people conducting it. William will not be sentimental. He will not prioritize family feeling over institutional duty. He has learned, at considerable personal cost, that sentimentality in the face of bad faith is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability, and he is not a man who intends to be vulnerable in the ways that his predecessors have been. The Sussex question will be resolved. The titles will go. The formal connection between the Montecito operation and the British Crown will be severed cleanly and with finality. And on that day, we will see very quickly what the Sussex brand is actually worth without the royal family's name attached to it. My prediction is that the answer will be instructive, and that the silence from Montecito in the aftermath will be the most revealing silence of all. Here is where we end up after all of this. After the timeline and the financial questions and the protocol breaches and the discarded father and the bullied staff and the institutional cowardice and the weaponized memoir and the Netflix confessional and the decade of chaos that a few people in a few wood-paneled rooms could have prevented by simply doing their jobs, we end up with the same conclusion that millions of ordinary British people reached years ago, watching that engagement interview on their televisions and feeling something that they couldn't quite articulate but that amounted essentially to, something here is wrong, something was wrong. The instinct was correct. The pattern was real. The concerns were valid. And the people who dismissed those concerns as snobbery or racism or small-mindedness, the media commentators and celebrity supporters and progressive columnists who positioned skepticism about Meghan Markle as a character flaw in the skeptic rather than a reasonable response to observable evidence, those people owe a significant portion of the British public a very large apology. They won't give it, of course. Accountability is no more fashionable in journalism than it is in Montecito.